Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again, everyone. I see there are still people joining, but why don't we, in the interest of time, at least start with a brief introduction. My name is Jamie Boex. I am the Executive Director of the Local Public Sector Alliance, or LPSA, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to the first meeting of LPSA's Thematic Working Group on Local Democracy, Inclusive Governance, and Community-Led Development. Before we dive into the meat of today's meeting, I would like to take a few minutes to provide you with a bit of background on LPSA and on why we decided to launch this working group. First, for those who are joining us today for the first time, it's good to know that the Local Public Sector Alliance has a mission to promote inclusive, equitable societies and sustainable global development by enhancing the understanding of decentralization and localization as complex, cross-cutting, and multi-stakeholder reforms. As many of you know, decentralization is a multi-stakeholder reform drawing on experts from many different disciplines. If I look across the room who is joining us today, I see lawyers, I see economists, I see political scientists, and colleagues from many other disciplines. But one thing that unites us is our understanding that inclusive governance and sustainable development take place at the local level. Next slide, Lima. As such, what LPSA aims to be is an alliance of advocates for inclusive and efficient decentralization and localization. And we aim to do that in three different ways. We hope to engage in knowledge development where necessary. We aim to engage in knowledge sharing, exchange of knowledge between partners around the world and colleagues around the world. And we would like to expand our community of practice, the community of practice of people who understand decentralization and localization, including by reaching out to other practice communities and by shifting the focus of the community of practice from the global level to the country level. Now, as shown on the next slide, we don't just preach decentralization, we also practice it as an organization. Not only do we believe that government functions should be decentralized to the closest level to the people as possible, but we have organized LPSA in the same way, so that the bulk of the Alliance's activities do not take place globally, but through working groups, both regional working groups in each of the global regions, as well as thematic working groups. And today is the launch of our second thematic working group on local democracy. Subnational finance was launched a month ago, and in a month, hopefully, if you're interested, you'll join us for the launch of the Gender Equity and Women's Empowerment Working Group. Now, by way of background, of the topic and why we believe local democracy is important. If we take a step back and look at the topic of decentralization, Wallace Oates once said that contrasting forces, some leading to increased centralization and some leading to greater decentralization, are producing an ongoing restructuring of public sectors throughout the world. So while we may believe that there is in the long term a move towards decentralization everywhere around the world, in reality, there is a pendulum that swings back and forth, and the reason for decentralization may change from time to time. Next slide, please. If we take a bit of a step back, going back to the 1960s, you could say that in each decade there was a different motivating factor for countries to decentralize. And for those who are a little bit older, perhaps, and remember the 1990s, the fall of the Berlin Wall, apartheid being undone in South Africa, many of us remember that decade, the 1990s, as a decade where democratic governance and local democracy was the primary motivation for decentralization reforms around the world. Unfortunately, at the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, in part due to the global war on terror, as it is sometimes called, in part due to the Millennium Development Goals, the emphasis of the development community shifted away from democratic governance towards other people, other topics rather, the MDGs, state legitimacy, conflict, and so forth. But it seems like the pendulum has been swinging away from democratic governance for some time, but perhaps is starting to swing back in the direction of understanding the importance of decentralization and local democracy. And as it's shown on the next slide, the logic of the argument is this. When countries are truly committed to inclusive governance and democracy and community-led development, countries will empower their citizens to address collective challenges as close to the people as efficiently possible by empowering their local governments with autonomy, authority, and resources. And doing so will open up space for inclusive and contestable public decision-making. It can create vertical checks and balances, and it can give voice to otherwise marginalized groups. And these are things that central governments cannot do by themselves. The opposite of this point on the next slide suggests that when political systems become less open, regimes tend to shut down spaces for contestation and opposition, including democratic local government. And so, in a way, the vibrancy of local governance and the empowerment of local government institutions can serve as a very important canary in the coal mine, as it were, of democracy. And I think what we're seeing increasingly around the world is in places where people feel that government takes more than it gives, or where there are feelings of people being left behind, that these feelings are at the root of social discontent and political polarization and distrust of government, which is, I think, a major theme in countries around the world, including my own. Centralized governance, by definition, limits the space for political contestation, voice, and empowerment, so that countries that are proactive about guarding their democracy are paying increased attention to decentralization and localization to make sure that no region and no community within their borders is left behind. Where does that put us as LPSA? I think first we want to remind our colleagues who value democracy that local democracy is fundamental to democracy overall. For instance, Alex de Tocqueville said that town meetings are to liberty what primary schools are to science. They bring democracy within the people's reach. So we want this working group to go forward and emphasize and remind the larger community of practice that decentralization isn't just important for service delivery, it isn't just important for public sector efficiency, but there is an inherent argument that decentralized local governance is good for democracy. Now, in many OECD countries, what we find is that often 90% or more of elected officials are locally elected officials. But at least from what I see in terms of global diplomacy and global development, that the emphasis, or the lack of emphasis rather, on local democracy is quite stunning. If democracy is more than 90% local, shouldn't 90% of democracy assistance in countries around the world focus on the local level? If nothing else, should it be closer to 50% rather than 5 or 10%? And if we believe that locally led development is critically important, shouldn't we have better metrics about the degree of local government empowerment from around the world? It was these types of questions that stimulated us to set up this working group. With that background, let me hand over the rest of the session to Augustine Magaluwando. I'm very pleased to share that Augustine has agreed to take on the role of co-chair of the Thematic Working Group on Local Democracy, Inclusive Governance, and Community-Led Development, while Lima Jamir will be the working group's coordinator. A number of you who are present in the room today have already agreed to contribute to the working group as core working group members. And the Alliance is currently looking in the process of identifying additional core working group members and co-chairs for the working group. A few words about Augustine. Augustine is the regional director with the Democracy Works Foundation based in Lilongwe, Malawi. Augustine has over 20 years experience in international development cooperation, particularly in the fields of governance, democracy, and human rights. Most of these years were spent in the field of political party strengthening in sub-Saharan Africa. Previously, before joining the Democracy Works Foundation, Augustine worked with the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy as the Africa Regional Representative. He holds a PhD in political science, focusing on democratization, aid, and development cooperation, and a master's in development management from the Ruhr University in Germany. With those words, let me pass over to Augustine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jami, and a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us this afternoon if you are in this part of the world, and this morning if you are across the Atlantic, and late this evening if you're on the other side of the globe. As Jami has said, this is one of the few working groups that are there under the Local Public Sector Alliance. And in this particular working group, we will be focusing largely on issues that pertain to local democracy and inclusive governance. Of course, a lot has been said about why local democracy is important and why we must care. But of course, there is so much that we tend to take for granted. Even to just talk about what we mean by local democracy is not something that we really all can have a shared understanding of. And this particular working group, therefore, has the ambition of contributing to the debate around local governance, local democracy, and inclusive governance from different perspectives. First, we would like to contribute to enriching the conceptual understanding of local democracy, so that as we all are very much preoccupied with this very important piece of work, we also have to some extent a shared understanding of what we talk about. In a way, we seek to contribute to generating shared, or if not comparative, perspectives, but which would allow us to also have a conversation based on some kind of equal level in terms of information and conceptual clarification. So when colleagues in Mexico would talk about local democracy, colleagues in Jakarta could relate to what they're talking about, and colleagues in Nairobi or Lilongwe could also indeed imagine what local democracy is about. But most importantly, there is so much that we all are doing in our respective fields as individual academics, practitioners, advisors, or indeed as institutions. This particular working group seeks to be a platform that would serve as a way of exchanging those different knowledge and experiences, so that we can enrich, our work, and most importantly, maybe we can become better, more efficient, and probably also indeed optimal in the way we utilize resources. And it's a community of practice, so it's bringing together wide range of actors, government officials, policy practitioners, scholars, civil society organizations, and of course, citizens at large who share an interest and expertise on local democracy, inclusive governance, and community development. Maybe before we go to the theme of the day and before I introduce our speakers of today, just a few remarks about how we envisage the working group unfolding and evolving going forward. We hope we can hold this kind of series of discussions around issues of relevance and issues of interest. And today we are focusing largely on the question of what is local democracy, how must we understand local democracy, and why does it matter? We will be looking at this particular question from different perspectives. We will have an Asian perspective and we will have an African perspective that will be presented by our two speakers. And we will be holding this kind of similar conversations on different topics. And of course, we welcome very much also your suggestions in terms of what other themes and issues we can be preoccupied with. As we continue to do so, we hope that our conversations can be better systematized and structured, and at the end of the day, also consolidated in form of some knowledge product. We have this big ambition that if we can hold these conversations over a period of 1 year, we should end up with a working group's working paper or primer or indeed a policy brief that will capture, among others, the state of local democracy based on the key topics that we would have discussed. Who are we looking at as our audience? We are looking at thought leaders around the world that should be part of this conversation. And these would include citizens and civil society advocates for local democracy, including international, national, and local level NGOs and foundations. We are also looking at development partners interested in promoting good governance and local democracy. We are also looking at local government officials and local government associations, researchers, scholars, and students in the field of political science, public administration, and governance. So it's quite a wide range. And of course, in this discussion today, we already have this kind of audience being fairly represented. Today, we are very much privileged to have two speakers that will kickstart a conversation on local democracy, inclusive governance. How must we understand this, or how it is understood in the case of Asia or in the case of Africa? And the two speakers that will kick off the conversation, Zipporah Wambuya and Mohamed Mustafa. Zipporah Wambuya will be presenting to us what I am tentatively calling an African perspective. He is the Director in Public Participation and Civic Engagement, government of Makueni County, a sub-national in the Republic of Kenya. Her expertise is in the area of policy participatory research, community-led development, and governance for sustainable development. And from Asia, we have Mohamed Mustafa, who has served as Program Director for Democracy and Governance at the Asia Foundation office in Indonesia since 2018. He has more than 15 years of experience in governance and democracy, with a special focus on democracy, local governance, human rights, counter-violence, extremism, freedom of religion and beliefs, and digital literacy, including countering mis- and disinformation. Mustafa has managed and implemented programs supported by various development institutions in Indonesia, such as DFAT, International Finance Corporation, World Bank, United States Agency for International Development, British Embassy, Global Affairs, Canada, and Google. I think you can agree with me, dear colleagues and friends, that we do have indeed two eminent colleagues that are well experienced in their own right, and of course that have very much hands-on practical experiences with respect to local democracy, local governance, and inclusive governance in the case of Zipporah, and of course also with quite a lot of academic experiences in the case of Mustafa. Now, this is how we are going to have a conversation. This is meant to be a more interactive conversation. We will first have our two speakers make very brief interventions addressing the question, what must we understand as local democracy, at least from where they are sitting or standing, and why does it matter? And after they have shared with us their perspectives, we will open up the discussion to contributions from all of us. I would suggest that we use the various multiple channels we have Nima will be coordinating the interventions in terms of identifying the speakers, but we also have a chat platform on the side where you can post your comments, you can ask your questions. We'll try to the extent we can to make sure that we pay attention to both the hands that will be flagged up and also the comments that will be presented on the side. And like all virtual platforms, of course, we can only speak when we've been recognized to do so, so that we have a more coordinated and structured conversation. Without further ado, dear colleagues, I would like to invite our first speaker, Zipporah, to give us her perspective from Kenya. Over to you, Zipporah.
Thank you very much. A very good morning and a good afternoon to the listeners across the globe. My name is Zipporah Wambua. I am privileged to present to you my local understanding or an African perspective of local democracy and inclusive governance. I will also be able to share a brief experience, the Kenyan experience since 2013 up to date, and as well as from a subnational perspective, being a member or a government representative of the government of Makueni County, which is a subnational in the Kenyan government system. Now, in our own understanding here, local democracy really means the pursuit for self-governance, governance in the cities, in the towns, and in the villages. It is really the process of bringing government closer to the people and ensuring that there is a shift of power to the people to ensure that the people are part and parcel of the government decision-making. They are the drivers of government service delivery, and they are responsible in terms of ensuring the equity and sustainability of programs in the county. The Kenyan story for devolution is ambiguous, complex, but progressive in nature since the 2010 promulgation of the Constitution of Kenya. It was enacted, and later on the actual implementation began in 2013 through the formation of the 47 counties of Kenya, among which Makueni County is one of the 47 counties under one national government. And that involved decentralizing fiscal administration. It also had administrative decentralization in terms of every county having a governor and other administrative structures in terms of sub-county administrators, ward administrators, all the way to the village administrators. And on the other end, it opened up an opportunity or a model for the participation of the people. And therefore, when we talk about local governance here, we are talking about decentralizing public services, public goods from the central government, Kenya, to the subnationals, which are the 47 counties. And then the third strand, which is moving from the county headquarters to where the people are, in the wards and in the villages. And therefore, that's defining my second definition of inclusive governance, where it is when governance is inclusive, ensuring that there is engagement of all people and there is a continuous asking who is excluded and ensuring that no one is left behind of any gender in policy-making processes, in project access, even accountability and responsiveness of the government to all members of the community. And therefore, in Makueni County, the outlook follows the County Government Act of Kenya, which establishes county governments and provides the principle of public participation. That is the principle to which we define our devolution idea here, which I have talked about the three phases of our decentralization here. But of principle is the principle of public participation. When you look at the Kenyan law, there's what we call the principles and objects of devolution. And one of the key one is that of proximity, ensuring that government becomes closer to the people through delivering services in the closest level possible. And then also the principle of subsidiarity and the principle of public participation. This is the engagement of people to ensure that all decision-making, including project prioritization and governance in general, are done by the people and through the people.
Yeah.
And therefore, yes.
Yeah.
Someone is speaking?
Yes, that was just an interference. Please proceed. You have about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Some of the challenges that led to this outlook of the Kenyan context were that we lacked strong and comprehensive policy documents that guided citizen engagement. Over the time since 2013, therefore, after the enactment of the law, we've now been able to ensure that we establish the citizen engagement frameworks and ensure that there is citizen and government involvement. The next challenge was the challenge of the absence of regulatory frameworks for volunteerism. If we are to be democratic enough, then it means that our communities, even our organizations, including the civil societies within the country, then have to volunteer, the spirit of volunteerism, ensuring that their rights are met, but every right goes alongside responsibilities. And lastly was low capacities in terms of facilitation of public participation. And therefore, over time, in the last 7 years, our government, and especially at the subnational level, this has become a critical space to ensure that communities and governments speak to one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zipporah, for that. And thank you very much for highlighting quite a number of important aspects with respect to local democracy. And you highlight quite a few of those, emphasizing the pursuit for self-governance, bringing the government closer to the people, making the whole notion of government being people-centered, and ensuring that in essence, you have also the kind of democracy or the kind of government that is guided by some constitutional principles, in the case of Kenya, highlighting the principle of proximity, subsidiarity, participation, and of course, also the challenges that needed to be addressed if we speak to in ensuring local democracy and local governance can be operationalized. I would suggest we hold on to any comments and questions that we would have, and even our perspectives, because I would want to suggest that we jump straight into the presentation, a short input of Mustafa, who will be presenting on the same questions, but giving us a perspective of Asia. Muhammad.
Mustafa, kindly unmute, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate the LPSA effort to have this meeting. Jaime, Agustino, and Lima who make this happen. I'm really glad to have been here. This is my first time as well to join with this working group. I would like to share the experience, not necessarily representing Asia, but maybe specifically from the Indonesia context. I would like to start with a broader context of how democratization and inclusive democracy have been promoted at the local level in Indonesia. And with this, please expect not mostly good news, can be like a lot of bad news as well. First, Indonesia has implemented massive decentralization since 2021. This includes political decentralization, administration decentralization, and also financial decentralization. Now, Indonesia is divided in the 3 levels of government, at least: the national one, provincial government, which is 37 provinces existed now, and 600 cities or districts. The most of public affairs are now decentralized to the district or city level. But in terms of the political decentralization, one feature of our decentralization is increasing political competition for power among local elites that is served by the direct election. So our decentralizations mean like a mayor, region, or district head are politically voted by through direct election, including local legislative. So that's the first background. The second is like while Indonesia is known as heavily take all the principle of decentralization, actually democratization in the context of decentralization is implemented in the context of Indonesia, which is not actually a fertile ground for democracy in terms of being an inclusive society. Indonesia is known as the majority people are very religious, conservative. There have been issues about primordialism, patriarchal community, and etc. Allowing that decentralization in terms of politics mean the competition of local elites. The local competitive political competition interplay with this under undemocratic society. The heightened political competition among local elite drive them to align with the values held by the majority to ensure political support. This often results in the emergence of populist leaders who focus their governance and development effort on issue or sector that promise popularity from the majority. This situation poses barriers to achieving inclusive local governance in the context of Indonesia, with the impact varying depending on the specific group involved. Different groups that usually left behind in the development face varying level of acceptance, rejection, and challenge within the context of local politics and societal structure. I can broadly categorize the situation into three groups. First is issues related to groups that are less rejected and even firmly accepted by the majority. These issues include the inclusion of women, children, poorest people, people with disability. In Indonesia, for this issue is there have been a lot of improvement in terms of policy on try to involve them in the all aspect of development, including the participation, ensuring their access to development. This issue related to women, children, poor people, people with disability is generally well accepted and promoted by national and local government, even by elite politics, through various regulation and innovation. However, for these people, the consistency in the implementation constrained by various capacity of local government in implementing or in making a best effort to respond the issue. Also, there is a problem about the prioritizing their needs, because in the context of Indonesia, this issue is actually not provide incentive for elites populism. So in many cases, even though the commitment is high, the implementation is like behind. The second group is those in the issue of a group that their existence is rejected by the majority, especially the conservative groups that claim to represent the majority. They wanted to control the societal value based on the majority norm by rejecting others and enforcing the local government to follow what they want. This is mostly about the minority group, such as Christian in the majority Muslim community, Muslim in the majority Christian community, minority local belief, and even like a minority fraction of majority religion, such as Shia in the context of Indonesia or Ahmadiyah. Incidents of eviction of this group from the majority area, restriction on religious expression, and banning the establishment of religious worship establishment is still often occurred in Indonesia. Local government in this context, in this case, mostly act and react to please the majority demands, against reflecting their populism issues. Especially for populist leader, religious issue is sensitive issue. For those minority group, even though their rights are actually protected by the constitution, various national policy and local policies complicate the issues. Many implementing policy at the national level are oriented to manage the interreligious harmony by serving the majority. And at the same time, local government often express their majoritarianism through establishing what we call local religious-based regulation, which is mostly to please the majority. The case of enforcing wearing hijab in public school, for example, or wearing hijab in government office, for example, is among many practices that in Indonesia is often occur. In this issue, some practices of building inclusive policy does emerge in the context of, for example, conflict resolution, providing equal right and tolerance promotion. However, still, the issue is still there. The third group is those who even their existence is rejected institutionally, culturally, and even by the claimed national identity values. They are such as LGBTIQ people. Inclusive local government initiative related to this issue is hardly found in Indonesia. Many local government even issues regulation with orientation to ban their existence and activism and their expression. This effort, there are minimum effort to them, but still very limited to the providing services like in the case of HIV response, for example, give them a health service, or the allowance of using their name or their appearance in their identity card. But in most cases, their existence are rejected. In short, Indonesia is not a fertile ground for inclusive local governance promotion because democracy in the concept is implemented within or in the context of undemocratic society. In the context of decentralization, rather than providing incentive to being more inclusive local government for the most vulnerable group, such as religious minority and LGBTI, decentralization can create further pressure for them in the area where local government politics are driven by strong majoritarian-based populism. Yet, as I mentioned before, practice for more inclusive local governance have more opportunity to progress for the group like women, poorest group, children, and people with disability. However, there's still homework even in Indonesia to really and genuinely mainstream those group rights and interests in the local governance matters. With that, I think I end my explanation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mostaf, and thank you very much for giving us a slightly different perspective in terms of the challenges of local democracy in an environment that seems to be rather inimical and at the same time against background of efforts that are being made to really make local democracy work. Colleagues, we do have quite some time ahead of us that we can use. I mean, we have about 30 minutes or so that we can use to engage between and amongst ourselves. We can, of course, pose questions to Zipporah and Mostaf for clarification, but we can also share our own perspectives. We remind ourselves that discussion today is revolving around unpacking local democracy and inclusive governance. What does it mean from our perspectives where we are, from our experiences in engaging in and in interrogating this particular concept, and why must it matter? The two colleagues have kicked off the discussion with their various inputs, but now the floor is open, and I would like to invite comments, questions, clarifications, and please let's really make the best of the time we have. And Lima will help us in identifying who is speaking next, and the chat platform is also open. May I see the hands? Lima, I don't know whether you are able to see anyone who has raised a hand or anyone who has posed a comment or a question in the chat that we can take.
No one has raised their hands as yet.
Okay. Dear colleagues, this is really great. It means either the two speakers were so eloquent, very much clearer, and that we agree with everything that they have said, in which case the meeting can close almost now. Or indeed there's so much to be said and we are thinking about it. I tend to think we are thinking about it. So yes, we have a question from Mike. Go ahead, please.
Yes, if I can figure out. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I think there's no question that citizen participation is necessary for successful decentralization, along with competitive local elections and an informed local population. My question is more on how do we do this sustainably? How do we start it so that it's something that sustains even after an activity has ended? Because I've seen many USAID activities that try to promote citizen engagement in local governance, but very often when the activity ends, so does the engagement. And it seems that without an implementer there facilitating the meetings, providing transportation, food, drink, sometimes even sitting fees, that this participation is very difficult to sustain once an activity has ended. And so I'd be interested in hearing from people if they have seen any best practices in how to sustain citizen engagement once these development activities have ended. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think it's a very important question you raise, particularly if local democracy is being championed as a donor-supported initiative. How do you ensure that beyond that intervention, local democracy can continue to thrive? I'm sure that there will be plenty of experiences from others that that might have similar experiences or maybe might have dealt with this experience. I see Raj Hem from Indonesia really wishing to share from Nepal rather, wishing to share the Nepalese experience, but only in the next meeting. Let me just encourage you that if you would want, you can already start doing so in this particular meeting. So don't wait until the next meeting, which definitely will be there. But for now, you're welcome to join. Yes, a question is on the floor from Mike, but I'm sure that we can also hear from others. Can we see the hands?
Can I respond the question first based on the experience?
Yes, you can. Go ahead, please.
Okay, despite our idealism about decentralization, actually in the context of Indonesia, the pure implementation is depending at the end is the capacity of citizen to demand for downward accountability, right? Because we cannot expect that the government will do good without a strong demand. So in the context of Indonesia, one of the feature of Indonesian democratization so progressing, despite the context for some minority group that I mentioned before, is like there have been a lot of sustained, not only sustained program, but sustained actors from the development project. In Indonesia, there have been a long period of investment on the civil society organization, civil society group that represent community to be able to always being active to monitor the government and demand for downward accountability. And so far in Indonesia, even in the case of inclusion or exclusion of minority group, this civil society continue their working with the knowledge that they introduced by a lot of donors in the beginning of decentralization, about democracy, about human rights. They continue to work on that. So for us, it's like investing in establishing vibrant civil society in the context of a developing country like Indonesia is very important. And why it is important? Because in the context of Indonesia, the distance between state, even local government, with the community is still too high. Their understanding about government, their right as a citizen is very low. So that's why we need a mediatory actors that is to continue to have the community voice their concern to the government. So this group is very important. And that's why if you see in Indonesia, most of good governance program are led by civil society because they serve two. One is expertise. The second is like their pressure power to the local government. That's my comment, Agustin. Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine. I'd like to give a perspective of the Kenya and especially the Makueni experience.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just answering to the expert from the USAID is to say that one of the key things that every donor should think about is sustainability of each of the interventions they do in a particular country. Given the law in Kenya, and in particular the Constitution of Kenya 2010, that really talks about the local governments at the subnational giving the civil society an opportunity, as well as establishing units within the government itself that support and ensure affirmative inclusivity and inclusion of the civil society. Gives us a good framework for where to begin. And therefore, that means that if there is close partnership with USAID and any other donor organization with the local governments at the local subnationals, then there is continuity once there is handing over or there is facing off of a program. Number two is the aspect of concentrating on strengthening the local government structures, because every country, and especially those that come to benchmark in Makueni, which has been said as one of the model counties in terms of modeling devolution at local level, is that if donors focus on strengthening the structures that are required by the Constitution within the law, within the county or subnational levels, then there shall be sustainability. We forget that once you have left, once your program is over, government at the local level with its people should be able to continue the programming. So because of that, Makueni County has established the County School for Devolution and Community-Led Development. It is because we want this democracy to be first, become the theme for the subnational, so that every department that is offering services knows that they should offer citizen-centric service delivery. And number two, that our programs should be, and it is because the law anticipates that, should be community-led, community-owned, and community-driven. And therefore, when donors come to us, we seek that they strengthen the existing structures within government because the space is already provided by the law, and countries that do not have that law have continued to even benchmark with Makueni County to see how such a law of decentralization and devolution can be established. If then that is established across counties and across countries, then when a donor leaves, there is sustainability, there is more ownership, and the subnational is able to continue with the maintenance and the onward enhancement of the programming. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zipporah, for that. And I think there's also a very important comment here from Esther Ben, who is highlighting the point that it's important to look at the question of civil society in relation to the public administration, because that relationship is extremely crucial. And many discussions on local democracy tend to focus only on elections, as in local elections, I would imagine. But that those are only one part of the democratic cycle. Elections don't end political deliberations. If something they set the tone for deliberation until the next election cycle, or sustaining deliberation in between elections, we need to create institutions that connect civil society inclusively with the state. I think that's indeed a very important observation when we talk about local democracy and inclusive governance, because there is need to ensure we do have mechanisms in place that would promote that. It would be good to hear from different experiences across the globe in terms of some of those mechanisms that are there to advance local democracy. We've heard from Zipporah about a very specific initiative that seeks to strengthen local democracy by strengthening the capacities and the knowledge of the actors through this school for devolution. I would imagine that that may not necessarily be catering only for Makueni County. But what are the experiences of others? We still have a bit of time. So let's see who would want to speak next. Okay, Lima, are you able to see anyone?
Yes, Dr. Julie.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Dr. Juliet Saleh. I am Regional Director for West Africa for United Cities and Local Governments of Africa. Yeah, I want to thank the presenters. In fact, Kenya has a very good example that we are advocating for other African countries to follow. However, we are having a lot of challenges when we talk about the sustainability of local democracy and the inclusive governance. We have challenges in other countries. And when we have to talk about who should be in charge, whom should we address these issues to? I want to imagine that we should be talking to the national governments, because they adopted the policy of decentralization and they know how they actually design their laws, how they formulate their policies. You know, so it is important if we have development partners coming in to support programs at the local level. If it is not in line exactly with what the government, they may have it on paper and they're not practicing it. That's why we will not have the sustainability. So the development partners have a partnership, bilateral or whatever, with the government. So they should be speaking to the national government that this is how it is supposed to be. And when they speak to the government will try to ensure that their policies are in line with what the development partners are saying. And then we'll start seeing some sort of sustainability, because if they do agree, they will ensure that those who work at that level, they try to do what is in the policy, or they'll try to reformulate their policies in line with what the discussions are. Don't forget, these policies were introduced in Africa in the early 1990s, and they adopted it. And we're still having challenges with political will. How far can they go in terms of accepting local democracy, in terms of ensuring that, you know, the different notions are respected? So we should also include the national government in that conversation, because they adopted the policy of decentralization and they know how well or how best they want it to be done, you know. So I am talking about the national governments being involved in the conversation. So that's the way I look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Juliet. And you do point out a very important aspect there of the role of national governments. And certainly, I think you're right. When we speak about local democracy, and I think Zipporah was unpacking that by pointing out that local democracy is indeed that democracy that puts the people at the center, that brings the government closer to the people. But here we are talking about power relations. the notion of bringing governments closer to the people suggests indeed that the national governments, the central governments, are divesting, are decentralizing, are devolving those powers to the people. But then you have situations of having national governments that do not necessarily indeed believe in or support. I think the point of Dr. Juliet is, up until national governments have the relevant, the requisite will, then it will be very difficult to advance local democracy. The question, of course, that then it comes about is, when we engage national governments that otherwise, pronounce on paper, but don't act in practice, how do you create this particular political will? This is not something that you can manufacture in a lab somewhere. It has to be dealt with differently. So how do you go about that? As you are reflecting on that question, Moses also asks a question. Is positive citizen engagement generally on the downward trend across the global north too? Suggesting that there's a downward trend in the global south, I would imagine. If so, what could be done, or what could explain this, and how can we make democracy work even with declining positive citizen engagement also in the global north? 2 questions on the floor, and the discussion continues. Do we see more hands? Yes, Amir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I was listening to all the participants, a very good discussion actually. This is Amir Nasrullah. I'm a professor of public administration in the Department of Public Administration, University of Chittagong, Bangladesh. So I'm actually very happy to see all the distinguished personals, those who are working on local governance and participation every day. I just want to give you some practical examples, especially from Bangladesh as well as from other developing countries or neighboring countries. You see, always we are in the class or in the discussion, we are talking about ensuring local governance, ensuring participation, ensuring good governance, everything. But I personally believe local governance or good governance or, whatever it is possible if there is participation, right? And that's why always we are focusing on local participation. But what is actually happening in case of developing countries? We see maximum people, nearly 80% people are living in the rural areas, right? And in case of developing countries like Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, we see that maximum people of the rural areas are each and every day fighting for 2 meals in a day, right? So they need to go for work. So that's why when we see there is a decision-making meeting or any participatory meeting organized by the local government institutions, these maximum people are not willing to go there because they need to fight for 2 meals a day. So if they go to, this sort of participatory meeting in the local government institutions, who will feed their family? They're saying that in one study, I was asking some people, why are you not going to the decision-making meetings in the local government institutions, especially in the local level, root level, right? In our case, we say it is Union Parishad. In Indian case, it is called Panchayat, right? So these people are telling that if I go there, the local representatives who are there in the local government institutions, they will maximum give one snack or one lunch for me, but they will take whole day from me, or at least 5-6 hours from me. So end of the day, who will feed my family? I have 3 or 4 members in the family. So that's why because of poverty, maximum rural poor people are not participating in the local government institutional decision process. So again, participation is in the book, in the black and white decisions. And because of this, what is happening, those who are in the power, those who are being elected, they are giving, they are taking the advantage of this. They have their own people and they are taking decisions based on their own interests. Right? So this is, I mean, some case happening in case of developing countries. So I'm just giving this story to you. I don't know what will be the answer. Again, we're always talking about local governance. We're talking about good governance. We're talking about participation. We're talking about, I mean, civil society engagement. But again, end of the day, it is not happening practically.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amin Asura from University of Bangladesh. You do paint a rather gloomy, concerning picture there by presenting real issues that need to be dealt with. Talking about local democracy might be too much of a luxury in poor countries. That's what you are suggesting, if I put it differently. And that at the end of the day, local democracy is actually hampered by real poverty situations that that affected the people that must be participating. So in other words, therefore, it would appear that if local democracy matters, and if local democracy has to be important, local democracy cannot be supported in isolation, but that we also must address and look at some other aspects of the socio-economic context within which local democracy is thriving or is failing to thrive. And I think in our next session, we should be looking at the approaches that are there in trying to address and promote and assist local democracy. But nonetheless, I think the questions are really quite important to reflect upon in terms of can local democracy thrive in a context of poverty? I think this is kind of like rekindling the old debate of democracy development that was there in the early 90s, and it's resurfacing now in the context of local democracy. It's a question we can continue to debate on. There's a direct question to the panelists. I would like to raise that so that our panelists can reflect on this in the second round of interventions. The question is, as was pointed out, decentralization is counterintuitive reform. What were the driving forces of decentralization reform in Kenya and in Indonesia that backed that trend? So some further insights are being requested with respect to Kenya and Indonesian decentralization experiences. If Zipporah and most staff can reflect on this, I would suggest you reflect on that as we move towards the end. Time check, it's we now have about 25 minutes before we can conclude. I would like to reserve about 10 minutes for the actual conclusion. So we have basically about another 10 minutes of interventions from the floor. Let's make the best of the remaining 10 minutes. And let's see if we can we have any hands that are still in the room that would want to speak. Dr. Juliet Saleh, I don't know whether this is an old hand or this is a new hand.
Shall I talk?
No, sorry, I just said there's an old hand.
All right, thank you very much. Okay.
This is Hemraj from Kathmandu.
Please go ahead.
Can I share?
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. This is Dr. Hemraj Lamistani from Kathmandu, Nepal. Basically, I have more than 25 years experience with a local government association in Nepal. And currently, I am working with the local government and provincial government and the federal government in Nepal in the local democracy areas. I just would like to share, few experience and the challenges faced in the promotion of local democracy in Nepal. Because I found it is a very good platform for sharing the local democracy experience. Basically, Nepal has started the democracy, basically decentralization process after 1990. And there was a local self-governance act 1999 promulgated, and after that the local democracy system was initiated. But once our country is converted from unitary system to federal system in 2015, and then there is a federal structure of a governance system in Nepal, and there are three levels of government: federal government, provincial government, and local government. Basically, there are 753 local governments. Some are rural local government and some are city local government, municipal government. And they have exclusive constitutional power, basically 22 exclusive power and 15 concurrent power together government. And they have revenue decentralization, administrative decentralization, and political decentralization. There are a good constitutional and legal provision of basically inclusive participation of women, youth, disabled people, and so on, and intouchable people also. But is the just now professor shared the issues, basically the challenges of the real implementation of the local democracy or inclusive democracy. We have also, experienced some issues. I would like the issues first. Basically, the local government do have the, revenue capacity is found very low. Mostly they have at least less than 5% own source revenue out of the total budget, annual budget of the local government, and they are mostly dependent on the federal transfer. It means there is a very limited scope of the local autonomy, and they have not been, they have received the most of the conditional grant transferred from the federal government and the provincial government. And this is one very important, or it is a very important issue, that the local autonomy, how can we ensure the local autonomy at the local government? At the same time, the administrative, decentralization, regarding the administrative decentralization, the central government is still, depute the, chief administrative officer, and all the staffs are working in the local government are under the administrative officer who are sent by the central government. So the local government are saying that they have not aid the administrative decentralization, and they have not got the opportunity or right to depute or to appoint the chief administrative officer themselves. This is another issue so we are facing, and there is no good coordination among the three levels of government. According to the constitution, it says that there should be cordial coordination among the three level of government to implement the the work. But because of this lack, there is a overlap, duplication, and the implementation have lots of issues in the local level. So these are some issues facing by the local government in Nepal. So I basically request to all that how can we improve the issues, to improve the inclusive democracy or inclusive governance at the local level. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that input, and we appreciate so much for all your interventions. And colleagues, we are coming to the end of our conversation of today. I just want to check in and ensure that I'm not leaving anyone who wanted to speak. I'm not leaving anyone behind, or I'm not excluding anyone. I see that so far I don't have anyone with any hand up, and in the chat box I also see that we don't have any further questions. I would like to suggest that our two speakers make their concluding reflections. Okay. And in making their concluding reflections, I would also want to come back to the question that I directly asked the panelists, if they can reflect on those questions. The conversation today was focusing on unpacking what we understand as local democracy and inclusive governance. And of course, we've touched on quite a number of other issues, but it would be good if, as we conclude, our speakers can tie some loose ends together. We started off with Zipporah, and this time I would like to start off with Mostaf. And Mostaf, please, you have 2 minutes.
Okay.
To make your concluding reflections.
Okay, 2 minutes. We just done an analysis from the district level. This one is about what drive a reform for at the local level. Basically, there are 3 components that incentivize the local government to perform. One is national acknowledgement, which is upward accountability to national. Their effort to follow the national guideline and etc. It is actually helpful for the local government to be guided to perform. The first one. The second, they will drive a reform if the reform is serve their popularity to the public. So if the demand is strong enough, if the community is deliberate enough on any issue of reform, the reform have very high hope to be prevail under local democracy. The third is visionary of leadership at the local level. So the third is like how the local government, the local democracy can really produce a really good quality of leader with strong vision about reform. Otherwise, local democracy can lead to the capture of predatory elites who don't care about reform. I think that's three things that is very important in the driving the reform at the local level. Thank you, Agustin.
Thank you very much, Mostaf. Zipporah.
Thank you very much. My parting shot is like this. If executed effectively, decentralization or devolution for the case of Kenya has the potential to enhance democratic accountability, responsive governance, and sustainability in terms of the localization of the SDGs. I want to underscore that the most important feature of local governance is the principle of public participation. And I have heard from the different countries the struggles that are there. But the strengthening of the community structures in terms of community committees, public forums, and enhancing a framework for volunteerism in any country is the way to go. We have a situation through which many countries provide handouts to people to come for public participation. It is until we integrate that spirit of the law, the spirit of volunteerism, that people stand out for their rights and the responsibilities attached to their rights. I therefore say that the people living in poverty have solutions to their needs. And therefore, with the establishment of subnationals and creating proper structures for public participation in terms of community committees, strong frameworks for volunteerism, governments have responsibilities to provide products of public participation. For example, the participatory budgeting framework, community monitoring frameworks, so that communities feel they are speaking directly to the governments, and the civil society feels they have the responsibility to guide communities towards this. And then ensuring that within government budgeting, beyond participatory budgeting, there is budgeting provided directly for community-led development programs so that communities can be able to take up the responsibility even at the implementation level. Whereas there have been many challenges in Africa, like the challenge of corruption, white elephant projects that demonstrates lack of project ownership, violence, especially in my country, Kenya, after every 5-year cycle of elections, there still remains under development, yet there is a lot of money by donors that has been within communities doing development. Now that there is a law that promotes public participation, it is my parting shot that the law needs to be adhered to. Donors need to come in and support governments at the subnational and at the national towards producing some of these products that will demonstrate the entry of communities being the center of decision making, so that the decision making process is not just about coming for soda and bread and claiming transport allowances, but the actual running of participation and decision making by the people with an understanding and capacity that it is their development, and therefore seeing the change themselves and championing the change themselves becomes the heart of transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah Wambuya. At some point when I was listening to you, I actually thought I was listening to you talking about Malawi, and talking about Zambia, and talking about Lesotho. And then I had to remind myself that you're talking about Kenya. It just underscores the fact that the issues you are raising are the issues that are very much common and can resonate quite a lot with other countries beyond Kenya. I think we can agree that the issues that we need to discuss are quite many, and that I think we can continue having these conversations, but unfortunately, like all good things, we have to come to an end. Now, before we do so, a couple of concluding remarks from myself as your chair. First, to thank each one of you for really a great first interactive meeting engagement in this working group. I think this being the first to have this kind of participation, I think it is really quite encouraging. I do agree with those that have indicated we need to be a bit more specific in these discussions, and of course we should aim to be more specific in these discussions. That brings me to my next point, that this working group is supposed to be our working group, and it is supposed to serve the interests and aspirations of all of us that are in this working group. Our role as a chair or moderator or coordinator is really to facilitate and to provide for this particular platform. We, the people, the members, are the ones that can make the best. So the strength, the quality, the relevance of this working group will be as good as us members ourselves. We therefore would like to encourage you or to reach out to Lima and to myself if you have any specific suggestions in terms of how we can improve our discussions, but also how we can even think about other relevant topics that we can discuss. We would want to come back at the beginning of next year with another series of discussions, and we would like to focus, among others, probably on the issue of strengthening local democracy. What approaches are there? What instruments are there? What experiences can we share? And strengthening local democracy under various, contexts. We've heard earlier about Indonesia and how difficult it is under a very complex, framework conditions there. We've heard about Kenya, and I'm sure that if we were to cross over to Latin America or even to North America, there will be so much to be spoken about local democracy. So how can we, and how is local democracy being promoted in those different jurisdictions? But I'm sure also that you would have quite a number of other very important, useful ideas that we can take into account. So here we are at your service, and to facilitate this. But please do really reach out to Lima, to myself, and I think through Lima we can share our contact details. You should be able to directly input into the decentralization.net platform for suggestions. And like I said, this group, of course, does have ambitions. So the next steps will be that we'll, of course, consolidate these discussions. We hope that we can just have a brief summary of the key issues that have come out. But most importantly, we would like to prepare for the next session, for which we welcome your ideas, in addition to the ideas that were flagged. And you heard Jamie earlier on indicating that we still are looking forward to be joined by another colleague as a co-chair for this working group. So we will be reaching out to some of you to help in co-chairing, essentially really moderating and ensuring that the discussions flow. We still hope that these conversations can be consolidated in some kind of a working paper, just to make sure that we have something that years down the road can be referred to. I think these are some of the issues that I wanted to highlight. And without further ado, once again to thank each one of you for joining us this afternoon in the case of this part of the globe, and this morning in the case of US, and of course, late evening in the case of our friends from Asia. I wish you a great evening, great morning, great afternoon, and we can look forward to further engagements. Thank you very much and have a good day.